I went to my prenatal checkup completely alone that morning, and by the time I walked out of that office, I understood something about my husband that I had spent 3 years refusing to see. What the doctor said to me in that exam room wasn't even meant to be a bombshell. It was one sentence, one casual, offhand sentence, and it unraveled my entire marriage in under 60 seconds. I still remember the sound of the paper crinkling under me on that exam table when I realized what she meant. If you've ever had a moment where one small comment from a stranger changed everything you thought you knew about your own life, stay with me, because this story gets a lot darker before it gets better. Welcome back to the channel. If this is your first time here, I tell true, personal stories about the moments that quietly break people open. The conversations, the discoveries, the small cracks that turn into earthquakes. If that sounds like your kind of story, stick around and subscribe, because I promise you, this one is worth the whole watch. I need to give you a little bit of background first, because you won't understand how much I lost that day unless you understand how much I had already given up to get there. I grew up Amish. Not Amish adjacent, not some loose Mennonite community with a little more flexibility, the real thing. No electricity in the house, horse and buggy into town, dresses I sewed myself, a hair covering I wore every day of my life until I was 22 years old. I loved parts of that life more than I can explain to people who never lived it. The quiet, the work with your hands, the sense that you belong to something bigger than yourself. But I also knew from a very young age that I wanted something the community couldn't give me. I wanted to choose my own life. I met my husband, I'll call him Daniel, that's not his real name, when I was 21. He wasn't Amish. He was an electrician doing work for an English family that bordered our farm, and he used to wave at me over the fence every single morning for almost a year before he ever said a word to me directly. When he finally did talk to me, it was to ask if the eggs I was selling at the roadside stand were fresh. That was it. That was the whole conversation. But something about the way he looked at me, like I was a person, not a role, planted something in me that I couldn't undo. A year later, I left. I want you to understand what that actually means, because for a lot of you watching this, leaving your family means an awkward holiday dinner. For me, it meant losing my mother, my father, my 6 siblings, my community, my language even, in some ways, because I stopped speaking Pennsylvania Dutch at home once I left. It meant being shunned. My own mother would not sit at a table with me for almost 4 years. I gave up everything I had ever known for Daniel. And I want you to hold on to that fact, because it matters for what comes next. We got married when I was 23. For the first 2 years, it was good. Genuinely good. He was patient with me while I learned things other people take for granted. How to drive, how a debit card works, how to use a smartphone without feeling like I was doing something sinful. He never once made me feel stupid for not knowing things. I fell more in love with him during that time than I had even been on our wedding day, if that makes sense. He was my whole world, because I had built my whole new world around him. But somewhere around year 3, something changed. Small things first. He started working later. He'd get calls in the evening and step outside to take them, even in the freezing cold, which struck me as strange, but I told myself it was just work. He started sleeping with his phone under his pillow instead of on the nightstand, something he'd never done before. I noticed it. I noticed all of it. But you have to understand, when you've given up everything to be with someone, you don't want to see the cracks. Seeing the cracks means admitting you might have destroyed your whole life for nothing. So I didn't look too closely. I told myself I was imagining things. I told myself this was just what marriage looked like after a few years. And then I found out I was pregnant. I want to pause here for a second, because this is where the story starts moving fast, and I don't want you to miss anything. Everything I'm about to tell you happened over the course of about 6 weeks. 6 weeks that ended a 4-year marriage and a life I had sacrificed my entire family for. When I found out I was pregnant, Daniel seemed happy, genuinely happy. Or at least, that's what I believed at the time. He hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. He told me he'd been secretly hoping for this for months. I remember crying into his shoulder, thinking that this baby was going to be the thing that brought us fully back together, that whatever distance had crept into our marriage over the last year would dissolve the second we had a family of our own to build. But something strange started happening almost immediately. Every single prenatal appointment I scheduled, something came up for Daniel. Work emergency, a client who needed him urgently, a meeting he forgot about. At first, I didn't think much of it. Men aren't always great at prioritizing doctor's appointments, especially early on, before there's anything exciting to see or hear. But by my third appointment, I started noticing a pattern. It wasn't that he was busy. It was that he seemed to actively avoid being anywhere near that clinic. If you're watching this and you've ever felt like someone you love was avoiding a specific place or a specific version of a conversation, hold that feeling for a second, because it's about to make a lot more sense. By my fourth appointment, I stopped even asking him to come. I told myself I was being considerate of his work schedule. In reality, I think some part of me already knew I didn't want to watch him make another excuse. It's easier to accept an absence you chose to expect than one that surprises you every single time. So on a Tuesday morning in March, I drove myself to what was supposed to be a completely routine 18-week checkup. Blood work and ultrasound, standard measurements. Nothing dramatic. I remember sitting in that waiting room scrolling through my phone, feeling something I hadn't expected to feel. A strange kind of peace. Like being alone in that moment was somehow easier than bringing the tension of my marriage into a room where I was supposed to be celebrating new life. I want to stop here for a second and ask you something, because I ask this in almost every video, and I really do read the comments. Have you ever had a gut feeling about someone you loved that you kept talking yourself out of? Write it in the comments below. One word is enough. I promise you, by the end of this story, you're going to understand exactly why I'm asking. When the nurse called me back, everything felt completely normal at first. She took my blood pressure, asked her routine questions, made small talk about the weather. Then she pulled up my chart on the computer, and I watched her face change, just slightly. The kind of expression you'd miss if you weren't paying close attention. She looked at the screen, then looked at me, then looked back at the screen again. "I'm sorry," she said. "I just want to double-check something before the doctor comes in." I didn't think much of it in the moment. Medical offices make mistakes with paperwork all the time, especially with insurance information. But she stepped out of the room for almost 10 minutes, which felt like an eternity when you're sitting there in a paper gown with your heart already pounding for reasons you can't explain. When the doctor finally walked in, she had my chart in her hands, and she sat down across from me instead of immediately reaching for the ultrasound wand like she normally did. That was the first sign something was different. "Before we get started," she said, "I want to ask you something, and I hope it doesn't come across the wrong way. Is your husband's name Daniel Whitfield?" I said yes, confused, because obviously she already had that information in my file. She paused for a second longer than felt natural. "I just want to make sure we're not mixing up two charts," she said carefully. "We have another patient in our system under the same insurance policy, listed as a dependent spouse under a Daniel Whitfield. She was actually seen here on Thursday. She's about 22 weeks along." I remember the room going very, very quiet. Not the doctor's voice, my own hearing almost, like everything around me had been turned down low. "That's not possible," I said. "I'm his wife." The doctor looked at me with an expression I will never forget for the rest of my life. It wasn't shock. It was the kind of gentle, practiced patience of someone who has delivered this exact kind of sentence before, to other women, in other rooms, more times than she probably wants to admit. "I understand this is a lot," she said. "I just wanted to check with you directly before I said anything further, because insurance records can sometimes be incorrect. But both of you are listed under the same policy number as spouses with 2 separate dependent entries. If you're new here, this is usually the part where I tell you it's about to get worse. And it does. So if you've made it this far, do me a favor and hit that like button, because trust me, you are going to want to see how this story actually ends. I sat in that exam room in a paper gown, 18 weeks pregnant, and I genuinely could not process what I was hearing. My first instinct, and I think this says something about how deep denial can run in a person who has already given up everything for someone, was to defend him. I told the doctor there had to be some kind of clerical error. Maybe it was an ex-wife still listed on an old policy. Maybe it was a coworker who had been added by mistake. I gave her every possible explanation except the one that turned out to be true. She didn't push. She just gently offered to move forward with my ultrasound if I wanted, or reschedule if I needed time. I told her to continue, because some numb, disconnected part of me needed to see that baby on the screen and remember why I was there in the first place. I watched my daughter's heartbeat flicker across that monitor, while my entire understanding of my marriage quietly came apart in the background as my mind. I didn't cry in that office. I want you to know that. I got dressed, I thanked the doctor, I walked out to my car, and I sat in the parking lot for almost 45 minutes without turning the key. Here's a question for you, and I really want you to answer this one honestly in the comments. If you found out something like this about your partner, would you confront them immediately, or would you quietly start gathering proof first? Because I chose the second option, and it changed everything about how this story ended. I didn't say a word to Daniel that night. I know that probably sounds strange, but something in me needed proof before I let myself fully believe it, because the alternative, believing it without proof and being wrong, felt more devastating than almost anything else I could imagine. I had already lost my entire family for this man. I needed to be absolutely certain before I let myself burn the rest of my life down too. The next morning, while he was in the shower, I went through our insurance portal online. It took less than 5 minutes to find what I was looking for. Under our joint policy, there it was, a second dependent, a woman's name I didn't recognize, listed as spouse, added 11 months earlier. 11 months. Not a mistake from years ago, not some leftover ex-wife paperwork nobody bothered cleaning up. 11 months, which happened to line up almost exactly with the moment his phone started disappearing under his pillow at night. I sat at our kitchen table with my laptop open, my hands completely still, feeling calmer than I expected to feel. I think when a shock is big enough, your body sometimes protects you by going quiet instead of falling apart. I made a decision in that kitchen that morning that I have never once regretted. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to accuse him and give him room to explain his way around it. I was going to find out the whole truth first. If you're the kind of person who needs closure before confrontation, I want you to comment the word proof below, because I have a feeling a lot of you understand exactly what I mean. Over the next 10 days, I quietly built a picture I never wanted to see. I found a second address tied to his name through a simple public record search, a rental unit less than 15 minutes from our house. I found photos, not hidden particularly well, on a social media account under a slightly different spelling of his name, showing him at a baby shower 4 months earlier, standing next to a very pregnant woman with his arm around her waist like it was the most natural thing in the world. Her name was Callie. She was 26, and based on the dates on those photos, based on the insurance enrollment, based on everything I pieced together, sitting alone at my kitchen table late at night, while Daniel slept peacefully in the next room, I came to understand something horrifying. He had married her, legally, on paper, using a slightly different version of his middle name to avoid the records crossing, which meant either the marriage to me or the marriage to her existed in some strange legal gray area that a lawyer would eventually have to untangle. He had built an entire second life, an entire second family, running in parallel to mine for almost a year. I want to pause here, because I know some of you are probably wondering how someone doesn't notice something like this sooner. And the honest answer is, I did notice things. I noticed the late nights, the hidden phone, the excuses, the missed appointments. I just didn't let myself connect them, because connecting them meant admitting that the life I had sacrificed my entire family for might have been built on something rotten from the very beginning. If you've ever ignored red flags because the truth felt too big to survive, please tell me in the comments, because I think more people carry that exact experience than we ever talk about openly. I confronted Daniel on a Sunday evening, 11 days after that appointment. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I sat across from him at the same kitchen table where I had discovered everything, and I laid it all out. The insurance records, the second address, the photographs, the pregnant woman named Callie who was, according to the math, exactly 4 weeks further along than I was, meaning he had gotten 2 women pregnant within roughly a month of each other while married to at least one of them, possibly both. He didn't deny it. I think some small, honest part of me had hoped he would, just so I could feel the satisfaction of proving him a liar out loud. But he just sat there, and after a long silence, he said the words that I will remember for the rest of my life. I didn't know how to choose. That was it. That was his entire explanation. Not an apology, not an attempt to fix it, just a quiet admission that he had decided somewhere along the way that he simply wasn't going to choose, and instead he would let 2 women build futures around him without either of us knowing the other existed. I left that house 4 days later. I stayed with a coworker at first, because there was nowhere else for me to go. My own family, the family I had given up everything for this man to have any relationship with at all, was still 4 years deep into shunning me. And even now, with my entire world collapsing, I couldn't fully undo that. But here's the part of this story I actually want you to remember, more than any of the shocking details. 6 weeks after I left, my mother called me. Not a letter this time, an actual phone call, the first one in almost 5 years. She had heard, through the strange, quiet network that exists even among the Amish, about what had happened to me. And she sensed something I will carry with me for the rest of my life. She said, "You left us for a life you thought was safe. I'm sorry it wasn't. Come home if you need to." I didn't go back to the community. That chapter of my life is closed, and I've made peace with that. But I did rebuild a relationship with my mother, slowly, carefully, over video calls and the occasional visit. Something that never would have happened if my marriage hadn't fallen apart in exactly the way it did. My daughter is almost 2 years old now. She has no idea, obviously, how close her existence came to being buried inside a lie so large it eventually collapsed under its own weight. I think about that ultrasound appointment often, the quiet exam room, the nurse's face changing when she read my chart, the doctor's careful, gentle sentence that unraveled everything. I think about how something as small and procedural as an insurance record was the thing that finally exposed a truth I had spent a year quietly refusing to see. If there's one thing I want you to take from this story, it's this. The truth doesn't usually announce itself with fireworks. Most of the time, it slips in quietly, through a nurse double-checking a chart, through a strange late-night phone call, through a gut feeling you keep talking yourself out of. Trust those small moments. They are often trying to tell you something long before you're ready to hear it. If this story meant something to you, I would genuinely love to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever discovered something about someone you loved in the most unexpected, ordinary way? Tell me about it below, because I read every single comment. And I promise you, someone else watching this needs to hear that they are not alone in what they went through. And if you want to hear more stories like this one, make sure you're subscribed, because next week I'm sharing another story that I promise you will not see coming. Thank you for sitting with me through this one. I'll see you in the next video.